And for more on this, I'm joined by our international affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. Doug, so Zelensky is really ramping up the pressure on NATO members ahead of this big meeting next week.
He really is, and it's his job to do so, you could argue. He's the president of Ukraine, a country at war right now, trying to fend off the Russian aggression. Look, we have said all along, we know, what does Ukraine want? What Ukraine desperately wants is to join NATO. Ukraine is equally aware, and Volodymyr Zelensky has made this clear. He knows he is not going to be allowed to join NATO at this Vilnius summit. That's off the table. And he has said, we understand that as long as a war with Russia, and Russia is still attacking us and we're at war with it, is at war, we're not going to be able to join the Western alliance. He understands that imperative there. But he's hoping that once the war ends, it will be much sooner rather than later that he will join. So when you say he's looking for a clear signal, he's basically looking for the blueprint for the road ahead once the war ends, and wants to know where the NATO allies stand. And this is where it gets tricky. Yes, NATO support has said time and again that it's foursquare in solidarity, staunchly behind Ukraine as long as it takes. We know all of the language. It's trotted out time and again. That's not going to change at this summit next week in Vilnius, where all the NATO leaders meet. But the problem is not all of the NATO allies, a lot of the NATO experts will tell you, they're not on the same page when it comes to how far to go in bolstering Ukraine and in reassuring it and giving it exactly what it needs, the type of security and weaponry that it needs. Zelensky himself has said that the counteroffensive is perhaps going slower than many had hoped, or was delayed, precisely because the weapons deliveries from the NATO countries took so long, and still a lot of them haven't come. And he said that gave Russia extra time to bolster its defenses, including sort of minefields that Ukraine is coming up against now, those minefields in the trenches. He wants not just a show of support. He wants to know concretely and specifically, what is NATO ready to do for Ukraine after the war? There are a sort of a coalition of countries within NATO, say the United States, say some of the southern European countries, and in Germany as well. They're seen, and analysts will tell you, they're more cautious. They do not want to go as quickly. They want to support NATO. They're foursquare behind, Ukraine. They're behind Ukraine, but they're not ready to go full out, all out on this. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have Poland, Lithuania, the NATO members who have been on the front lines of Russian history, a lot of Russian history, and they know what Ukraine's up against. And a lot of those Central European, Eastern European countries, they are foursquare. You help Ukraine now, do whatever it takes to help Ukraine. If you can't admit it to NATO now, fine, but do everything else, throw everything in the kitchen sink at it right now to try to help it fend off Russia. And then in the middle, you have that muddled middle. You have countries like France, the United Kingdom, some other Northern European countries, which are like, you know what, we have to do perhaps more than we've done in the past for Ukraine, but we also can't go as far as accession right away. So it's sort of that murky middle ground. And that's when I say they're not all marching in lockstep, the NATO allies. That's where he's trying to ramp up the pressure on them to get them more to see eye to eye. And he'd like them all to adhere more to the Poland and Eastern European stance.
We should mention that the NATO chief, Jens Stoltenberg, is holding a news conference, and he's just said that it's possible to have a positive decision on Swedish NATO membership at the summit next week. But